Trooper Cody and Steve, and this video is a result of a conversation with a couple of Americans very interested in the Anzac legend, and they had questions about the fact that the British weren't very forthcoming in praising the things that the Australian Light Horse and the Australians did in World War I. And they raised the topic of Lawrence of Arabia because there's a few things about Lawrence to talk about. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to talk about T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia. Born in August 1888, his mother, Sarah, was a servant and she worked for Sir Thomas Chapman. She got pregnant to Sir Thomas Chapman, and Shakespearean love story, Sir Thomas left his wife and went off with Sarah, and they lived together and raised a number of children, additional children, in addition to Lawrence of Arabia. And they took the surname Lawrence, didn't keep Chapman, and strangely enough, Lawrence was the surname of Sarah's mother's unmarried father of Sarah. What a convoluted story. So Sarah's mother was a servant for the Lawrence family. She got pregnant to the boss and had Sarah, and then Sarah became a servant, a governess, and she got pregnant to her boss, but then at least they lived together, continued to live together, and raised more children. Lawrence turned out to be a bit of a bright lad, went to university, and when he finished his schooling, he went to work for the British Museum as an archaeologist in the Middle East. That was in 1910, and he served as an archaeologist in the Middle East from 1910 till 1914 when the war broke out. By that time, he'd almost, to a degree, turned native. He could speak the language, he knew the customs, he fitted in extremely well in the Egyptian culture, and he knew the Ottoman culture, the Turkish system, and hence he was immediately recruited by the British Secret Service, MI5, MI6, whatever you want to call it now. It was then called the British Intelligence Service. So, they use him to do all sorts of undercover work. He can blend in, he can appear to be an Arab, and things are going very well. And then, of course, history is a fascinating thing because the Arabs wanted to overthrow the Ottomans, and at that time it was seemed convenient, conducive for the British to support the Arabs, and so they trained them and provided them with weapons and helped stir up the Arab rebellion. There are many stories about Lawrence of Arabia, movies, books, and there's one incident that's perhaps little known, and it's how Sam Colt saved Lawrence of Arabia's life, and in doing so perhaps set the course of history on an incredible path. So you say, now hang on, First World War, Sam Colt was already dead. How could Sam Colt have saved the life of Lawrence of Arabia? Well, what actually happened is that Lawrence of Arabia was keen on technology. He liked new cutting-edge technology. So in 1914, when a friend of his was travelling to America, Lawrence arranged for that friend to purchase for him 2 handguns and send them to him, and then he used those handguns in World War I. So when I say that Sam Colt saved Lawrence of Arabia's life, what happened was in a hand-to-hand combat situation, Lawrence was disarmed and his gun was taken from him, and when the person had the gun that was going to shoot Lawrence, went to shoot him with his own handgun, he was pulling the trigger and he couldn't make the gun work, and that was the Colt, couldn't make it work, and that was enough to give time for Lawrence to get to his feet to overcome the opponent. So when you hear that story and you hear it's a single action weapon, handgun, and it's a Colt, people automatically think that it was a revolver, a single action revolver. So what single action means is that the gun can be fully loaded, and when you pull the trigger, it doesn't fire the weapon. You have to cock the hammer and then pull the trigger and cock the hammer. So that's why people think it was one of Colt's revolvers. What had happened is Lawrence had heard about these new 1911 .45 caliber automatic pistols made by Colt. Friend was going to America, bought the Colts for him, sent them back to Lawrence, who then used, in the First World War, Colt 1911 in .45 caliber. You see him depicted in the movies with Webley 455, the British issue handgun. There's a famous story that Lawrence captured a high-ranking Turkish officer. He's got from that officer a .44 caliber Smith & Wesson triple lock, it's called. It's a .44 revolver handgun made by Smith & Wesson, triple lock. This is why there's confusion about when you hear the story of Colt saving the life of Lawrence, and because of the gun being single action, and you see these famous photos of the Smith & Wesson .44 that still exists in a museum, British Museum I think, not 100% sure. That's why there's this confusion. But the reality is the Colt 1911 .45 caliber, clip in the magazine, squeeze the trigger, every time you fire it, reloads itself, fire another shot. But when the Colt 1911 is still single action. So what that means is, you see it in the movies, you put the magazine in, you cock it to put a bullet up into the spout, but then you release the hammer and put it in your holster. So that when you get to an action, all you have to do is cock the hammer, fire, boom, 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 boom. So what happened is thank goodness, when Lawrence was overcome, the hammer was down, the opponent took the weapon and didn't know. You had to manually cock the hammer for the first shot. That's how Sam Colt saved Lawrence's life. So the other big story about Lawrence that means a lot to Australians and gets a few Australians a bit riled up is the fact that for a long time it was thought Lawrence of Arabia destroyed the Ottoman Empire, won the war, and rode into Damascus and took Damascus at the head of the column. So that didn't happen. So then the other myth is that the English were the first into Damascus. That didn't happen. The truth of that story is that on the 1st of October 1918, a small patrol of the 4th Light Horse rode into Damascus and found that the town was virtually ready to surrender to them, and the officials in the town were going to surrender, the 4th Light Horse. Shortly afterwards, around 5 a.m, the 10th Light Horse followed in after the 4th patrol. A regiment, the 10th Light Horse Regiment, rode in. They were commanded by Major Harry Alden, and they rode into the city, and so the Light Horse took Damascus. Then what happened is they were told to get the hell out so that the English could ride in. Big ceremony, big proclamation that the English took Damascus. But the truth is, a small group of the 4th Light Horse were the first, a lot more of the 10th Light Horse, Major Harry Alden, next, and then the British came in about 10 a.m, 5 hours after the Australians were in there. Lawrence came in around noon, 2 hours after the rest of the British. So the interesting thing, there's more interesting facts about Lawrence of Arabia, because when the war was over, he chose to re-enlist in the RAF as an ordinary airman. He went to the section that was working in the 30s, was working on high-powered motor launchers to rescue seamen that were, to rescue airmen that were shot down over the English Channel or just simply needed rescue. He was instrumental in that because he had seen a seaplane crash with 4 airmen on board. He had seen a rescue boat heading out to try and save them, and the 4 men had drowned before the rescue boat got there. So he was very keen to work on saving lives with these high-speed patrol boats, which it then turned out during the Battle of Britain in particular that what was essential to the British was their pilots. You could build more planes. You couldn't readily get more combat-worthy fighter pilots. So when a pilot was shot down over the English Channel, rescued, brought back, within 24 hours he could be back in another Spitfire Hurricane fighting the Battle of Britain. Of course, the thing about that is Winston Churchill, famous words, never have so many owed so much to so few. And the few, of course, were the pilots of the Battle of Britain, and many of those were rescued by the boats that Lawrence helped design, push for. But you think that's the end of it? Well, there's one more thing. So on the 13th of May 1935, after being in the Middle East as a spy, after being in warfare, after being captured, after being tortured, after being in hand-to-hand combat, after all of that, Lawrence is killed riding one of his beloved motorcycles, a Borough Superior, large motorcycle, high capacity, very fast, cutting edge for its day. He rode that at speed in a devil-may-care attitude, and he was riding on a country road, and he came over a crest and he saw 2 small boys on the road in his way on bicycles. He swerved to avoid them. He went over the handlebars and hit the ground. He was such a famous person that he was taken to a London hospital. He was treated by the world's most prominent neurosurgeon, brain surgeon. That was Sir Hugh Cairns. And what Sir Hugh found when he was treating Lawrence was he had no broken bones, he had no internal injuries, he simply had a brain injury. Lawrence lingered, finally died from his brain injury. This caused Sir Hugh to undertake a study of brain injuries, after which he was instrumental in having the British military adopt crash helmets, making it mandatory for dispatch riders and people riding motorcycles in the British military to wear crash helmets. And this was because his results were, had Lawrence been wearing a crash helmet, he would have survived, he would have lived on, because he had no other injuries apart from a brain injury caused by impact with the ground. This later led to legislation universal for crash helmets for motorcycle riders. So many little side stories there about Lawrence. Don't know how many you knew about the boats or the crash helmet situation. Sir Hugh Cairns, really right back in the 30s, instrumental crash helmets for motorcyclists. I'm just going to finish this video by saying all through the war, Lawrence carried an SMLE 303 rifle. When the war was over, he presented that rifle to the King, and the rifle now, you can see it in the Imperial War Museum. I believe that the two 1911 Colt 45s are lost to history. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Smith & Wesson .44 triple lock revolver is in a museum. Again, I believe it's the British War Museum. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you've learned a few different things that aren't run-of-the-mill Lawrence of Arabia history. Cheers. Till next time. Thank you.